The night was at its darkest when David, Ryan, Mark, and Jessica drove down a desolate road far from the city. The road wound through a dense forest, and all around them, the eerie shadows of trees seemed to close in. They were in search of a new adventure, one that would push the limits of their courage. A mansion, abandoned and forgotten by time, lay at the end of this road. People said that those who entered never returned. But these four friends didn't believe in such superstitions. They thought of it as nothing more than an old tale, something to laugh at. They were determined to prove that fear was just a trick of the mind, and tonight they would prove it. But little did they know, what awaited them was not just a story, but a terrifying truth that would chill them to their very core. When they reached the mansion, it looked even more sinister than they had imagined. The old, crumbling walls were covered in ivy, and the windows hung with tattered curtains, swaying eerily in the wind. A strange, foul smell lingered in the air. The door creaked open slowly, as though some unseen force was welcoming them inside. As they stepped into the mansion, dust filled the air, and the house seemed to breathe. Broken furniture was scattered across the floor, and old photographs hung on the walls. The faces in those photos, people who had once lived there, seemed to change with every glance. Jessica picked up an old diary from a table, and as she turned the first page, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, followed by a voice that seemed to come from nowhere. "You shouldn't have come here." For a moment, they thought it was their imagination, but as the pages of the diary began turning by themselves, the words on them caught their attention. This mansion once belonged to a royal family, but one fateful night, something happened. Something no one could explain, a secret, a murder that still haunts these walls. As Jessica read aloud, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening crash, followed by a terrifying scream that echoed through the house. David immediately switched on his flashlight, but the moment the beam of light hit the room, they froze in fear. In the far corner of the room, a shadowy figure stood, a tall, thin shape that was twisted in a way no human could be. Its eyes were dark pits, and its mouth twisted into a grin that seemed far too wide for its face. Ryan shouted, "We need to get out of here!" But it was too late. The walls began to bleed, thick, dark red blood dripping down like some horrible painting. The smell of decay grew stronger, and the temperature dropped to freezing. Mark ran toward the nearest window, trying to break it open, but as soon as his hand touched the glass, a cold, ghostly hand grabbed his wrist. He screamed, but before anyone could react, his entire body seemed to be sucked into the darkness. His cries faded as though he was being swallowed whole by the house. Jessica, David, and Ryan were left standing in shock, holding on to each other. From below, a disturbing laugh began to echo through the mansion. It was high-pitched, mocking. You can't leave. This house will devour you." The voice seemed to come from all around them, like it was inside their heads. They turned toward the staircase and ran, but with every step they took as though the ground was shifting beneath them. The walls, the floor, everything seemed to be closing in on them. Jessica suddenly remembered something from the diary. "If you wish to leave, you must return the oldest thing in this house to its rightful place." She looked around and saw a large, ancient bell on a shelf, probably the mansion's most prized possession. She hurried toward it, but as she reached out to grab it, a portrait on the wall shifted, and a dark hand reached out from it, grabbing her. Ryan, desperate, grabbed a nearby iron rod and struck the hand with all his strength. The portrait shattered, and a terrifying scream echoed through the air. The entire house seemed to tremble as though it was alive. With shaking hands, Jessica picked up the bell and placed it back on the shelf. For a moment, everything went still. The unnatural pressure in the air seemed to dissipate, and the door slowly creaked open. Without a second thought, the three of them bolted, not looking back. As they crossed the threshold, a deafening explosion shook the house, and in an instant the mansion crumbled to dust, like it had never existed. David, Ryan, and Jessica stood outside, gasping for air, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Their hearts pounded in their chests, and their minds struggled to grasp whether it had all been a nightmare or reality. But then Jessica felt something in her hand, the diary. It was still there. As she opened the last page, the words seemed to write themselves. This story is not over. As the eerie silence engulfed the darkened forest, the night seemed to stretch on forever. The cold breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of finality. What had happened to Jessica, David, and Ryan was a grim reminder of the horrors that lurk beyond the veil of our understanding. The cursed mansion, though reduced to dust, was not the true villain. It was a force that thrived on fear, on curiosity, and on those who dared to venture where they were not meant to go. This tale, like many before it, serves as a warning, a chilling reminder that some stories are better left untold, some places better left undisturbed. There are forces in this world, old and powerful, that we cannot hope to understand. They exist in the shadows, in the forgotten corners of our reality, waiting for the unwary and the reckless. The moral of this story is simple yet profound. Curiosity can be a dangerous thing. We may feel invincible, daring to challenge the unknown, but in doing so, we invite the very things we fear into our lives. Some paths are meant to remain closed, some doors unopened, for not everything in this world is meant for us to understand. So, as you go about your life, remember this: not all mysteries should be solved, and not all stories should be chased. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is to walk away from the unknown, to leave certain things untouched, and to trust that some places are better left alone.